Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for everyone who's registered and who has come along and joined us today. We've had really good numbers for this webinar, so I think it's obviously a topic that, I guess, I don't know, it's a topic that appeals to people, and I think it's because it's one of those topics that I think we know is so critically important. I think we all understand that the relational landscape or the culture of our school is going to be the determining factor in whether our programs are going to succeed or fail. But it's funny, isn't it? It always seems to be the one thing that sort of gets squeezed out time-wise in such a busy program and in such a busy curriculum that schools run. So I thank you all, wherever you are, for coming along today, because I know you don't have much time. And so I think for most people who are on the webinar today, you're back at school this week for semester 2. If you're not, if you're in some of the northern parts like my old stomping ground, I can see just looking at my attendee list that Anita Watt's online up there in Darwin. So Anita, you're unfortunate like me, you've got an A name, so you're at the top of the list. I thank you all for coming along, whether you're still on your mid-year break or whether you're kicking off semester 2 at the moment, for a topic that I hope is going to be of real benefit to you today. I'm not coming to you today with a magical wand or a new program or something amazingly expensive that you need to bring into your school. I think today really is about what are the little things. What are the little things in a high quality, high expectation relationship, and how can we use or how can we leverage that strong relationship for better performance in our kids and better learning as a result of that. So let's get cracking, hey. I guess the thing that I really want to make sure is clear to everyone is that there's a book by Richard Carlson which was Don't Sweat the Small Stuff, and it's all small stuff. Well, I think he's half right when it comes to relationships in schools. It is all small stuff, and I do want you to sweat it. I want you to actually understand that it is the little things done repetitively that make the biggest difference when it comes to relationships. And to that effect, I want you to understand the things that we won't be sweating today, the wrong stuff. We're not going to be advocating for positive relationship programs that need to be brought into your room. None of us have gone and developed a positive relationship with someone because of a program. It's something that happens far more informally, far more incidentally than that. So what we need to do is to not think that we can create a strong relational environment by only paying attention to relationships on a Wednesday afternoon. Nor should we think that just by learning about relationships that somehow improves our capacity to build one. It's one thing to have knowledge, but it's another to have working capacity. And what I would rather, I think relationships is one of those things that's a little like riding a bike. I think that it's not about, you can sit down and read the manual on what you're on riding a bike, but it's not until you're actually on, not until you're there and you're feeling the wheel spin around and you're experiencing the interaction between the road and the tyre and really getting a feel for how your own movements are impacting that, that we really get a sophisticated enough knowledge about riding a bike for us to be able to do it. So we're not going to be sweating programs today. We're not going to be talking about events either. I actually don't think from a school perspective that you can improve the relational capacity and quality of your people by doing some professional learning about it. I think anybody that's telling you that they can come into your school and they can train your teachers to build relationships in a day is kind of stitching you up and taking your money for no reason. And I don't think that schools with limited and finite resources are in a position to be spending a day, nor to be spending their funds on a presenter who's going to, in a day, magically make us better at relationships. It doesn't work that way. It's not an event, but it's a process, and it's a continual refining, tweaking, and messing around with that process that really allows us to build a high level of capacity and expertise in how you build those relationships. And indeed, like I mentioned before, it's the little things. When we talk about relationships, there was a fantastic study that I saw that was done from the United States, And what they did was it was about the only one I could see around teacher quality. I was going and looking at some stuff on teacher quality, and there was so much that was done in terms of outcomes and in terms of what other teachers thought and what experts thought. But what there wasn't in the great debate was voice for our students. And this study decided to look only at the voice of students, which I thought was really interesting. And they went, first of all, they went to schools that by academic standardised testing were kind of punching above their weight, were outperforming other schools. And they went only to those top 5% of schools. And then they asked the students there to identify who were the best teachers in those schools. And then once those teachers were identified, they asked the students about those teachers and said, what is it about them? What are the little things they do that make them the best teacher? And the one that came back at number one was that they say good morning and they use the name. So it wasn't a great pedagogical approach. It wasn't a program they had in their classroom. It was something that they did in a really simple and personal way every single day that made the difference. And I don't think you can teach that in a professional learning event. I think that's something that's great practice, people experimenting with it. I'm going to show you a cracking example today of a teacher that we found online who's got a very unique way to start the day that lets every student know that they're feeling that they're special in their classroom. So I'm not today going to advocate for plugins and bolt-ons. So this isn't about letting you know that you've got a special thing that you need to add to what you're already doing. I think that the process of relationships is not about finding time for them. It's about getting us to the point where we believe that actually none of the work that we really have to do in schools can succeed to any significant level without us, with none of our programs, none of our plugins, none of our bolt-ons can work unless we have that relational base in play. The next one I want to throw a couple of rocks at the idea of values. I don't want you to think that we're focusing on relationships in any significant way because we, for instance, name relationships or respect or empathy or responsibility as one of our values. It's not enough. It's not enough. In fact, most schools that go down the track of identifying their values stop short, once they've identified what they are, of doing anything that's particularly granular or meaningful with those values. So we need to step further and beyond and back down the hill. I guess I view the values exercise as being a bit of a bell curve. You start right down the bottom, really thinking about what are the behaviours and what's the language that exists in our school. You then go up to aspirational land, but then you have to go back down and you have to talk about how the determination of those values is actually impacting what's happening right at the coalface, right at the grassroots, right in those places that we don't see. We have to imagine ourselves as a fly on the wall a little bit sometimes, I think, to really get a grip on our values. And we have to think about what students are saying when we're not there, even indeed what they're saying about us online. We have to think about what they're saying, what parents are saying to each other in the car park. We have to think about what parents might be saying to students, or what students might be saying back when they're sitting around a dinner table or a campfire. We have to think about what our staff members are saying to each other when they're having a beer on a Friday afternoon as well. And if our values aren't impacting that in some way, then we went through the exercise pointlessly. So don't sweat that when it comes to relationships. The work here is to be done at the coalface. It's not to be done in determining some values that look great when we're on our letterheads and on signs around the school. And that's the same for a mission statement. It's one that we talk a lot about respectful learning environments in mission statements, yet when I get around and speak to parents and when I get around and speak to teachers and ask them, do they think we have an issue with respect in Australian schools? The large proportion of them say, yeah, I think we might. Now, it's not with any great comfort, it's not with any happiness, it's not with any really either conviction, but they've got a hunch that, yeah, we might have an issue with respect. But we keep using the word respect and respect in our mission statements and in our values, and it's just not working for us. And it's because it's a formal way of addressing relational behaviour. And what we need to do is to get incredibly informal. And that means, like I said, it means sweating the small stuff. So it's time to say, okay, let's shift our focus. We're very formal in schools. If we want to get something done, we write a policy or we have a meeting, when the truth is that we need to have a conversation. And so what I want us to do is to understand that from that point of view, it's about saving a budget this time around. If you want to take a relational focus, don't bring in an expert. Don't even, don't even send me an email saying, can you run a PD day on relationships? The answer is no, I would never do that to you. Save your budget. And what we need to do is to start to create salvation in this relational space from within and not from above, not from the external. So I really want us to think today. I want you to use today as a 1 hour opportunity to just reflect, to really stop and think back about what are the things that you I guess I got a bit of inspiration from the last webinar, and I had someone ring me up after it and tell me that what she really liked about the last webinar was that there was like the 10 commandments. So I've set today's up similarly, just for her. And so what I want you to do is to use those as a bit of a reflective lens, and I hope that some of those things are quite affirming, but I hope that some of them challenge you as well. I hope that you're able to identify maybe your superpower and your kryptonite within the 10 suggestions that I'm going to make to you around relationships, because it has to come from within. One of the things that we know about even behaviour change in schools, so often we're looking to build relationships to try and foster positive behaviours happening, and behaviour, positive behaviours are not just happening out of nowhere, and our students aren't going to start to present positive behaviours for us just out of the blue. If it's going to change, it's got to change with us. So I'd rather us take that focus today than thinking that this is a PD or a program expenditure imperative. So that's me framing up a little bit about the way that I'm going to tackle today, but you've probably noticed that I've sort of got, when it comes to relationships, I'll admit that I'm a bit of a relational nerd around schools, and that I get really obsessed with it. And I had to really rein myself in when I was designing even the presentation for today, because I'm saying that I want to do 10, I'm going to give you 10 suggestions, and I felt like giving about 85 different suggestions. So I really had to pull myself back. So what you'll notice is that I'm going to move quickly today. But what I am going to do is just I'm going to give you a bit of an idea about something that you might like to do in your school at the very end of the webinar today that I think will really help your teachers. So stick around for that, and I'll give that to you. And don't panic, I guess, about today as well. So even if you feel like I've skipped over something, you can ask questions. You can download the handouts from the handout section that's available for you now, and all the way through to the end of the webinar, and you can get involved as well. So it will feel like we're speeding a bit today, but just relax about that. You'll get a video of today as well, so that you'll get the YouTube link to our recording of it today, and you'll be able to go back over it as well. So don't panic a little bit today. I want you to be aware that sometimes webinars, when you come to a webinar, I don't know whether any of you had this wonderful joy of being, webinars are great because you kind of feel like sometimes you can do them in your tracky dacks, and no one can see me, so I can sort of sit back and relax. I could even grab my phone, and the presenter won't have any idea that I'm checking my Facebook. And I just want you to recognise that for yourself for a moment. And I want to really encourage you that the best webinars are interactive. So I want to really encourage you that there's 2 ways that you can participate today. Number one is that there's a question box. So really feel free to whack a question in there today. I'm going to pause. If you think that there's something that's contextual, well, that all sounds good, but at my school, this is an issue, then I really want to chew on that for a bit, because I actually think it'll be a benefit not just to you, but to all the other people that are present today as well, to contextualise some of this some way. I guess that question box too, just a little prompt that we have the amazing Chris online with us today, and Chris is my business manager, and she's in the background, and she's much better on the tech side of it. So I can talk my way through this stuff really well, but Chris knows what to do if you can't hear me, or if I'm breaking up in some way, or if you're seeing something odd, or some error message appears from the GoToWebinar control panel. Feel free to whack a question in there, and one of us will be able to help you out. If it's content, it's for me, and if it's for tech, it's for Chris. And the other feature that you've got today to make sure that we're not too passive is the hand up function. So GoToWebinar works very much like, there's a little bit of grounding, I guess, for our new people in the room, works very much like a classroom in that you can put your hand up. And if you do put your hand up, it's because you couldn't be bothered typing out a big question. I'm going to unmute you, and you'll be able to make a contribution verbally. Don't worry, we won't be picking on you or making that difficult for you. So if you would like, if you think you can add to the webinar in some way by making a contribution verbally, just whack your hand up. It'd be really great to have you getting involved. So I always like to differentiate a little bit in my webinars too. I'm really keen to make sure that we know who's here. And so what I'm going to do is just launch a little poll here. And what I would love to do is to find out about your role. So what I want to know is, are you coming at the webinar today as a principal or as a system leader? Are you an AP? I'd love to know if you're in a senior or a leading teacher position. Are you aspiring to be a leader? Are you thinking about this work as a way of being able to help others? Or are you here because you're somebody, I love to use the expression, at the coalface? I think you're are you somebody who's doing the work every single day? And I like to make sure that we get about 80% of the vote covered off here, because that way I know what the lay of the land is for our webinars, and I get to find out if there are any themes about the way we're working, and there's clearly a theme emerging here. So I'm going to give it a couple of seconds longer before I close this poll off and share the results with you. There we go, we've ticked over to 84%. So I'm going to close the poll and share the results. And as you can see, we have a vast majority of people who are doing the work of connecting with students today. So I'm very much going to keep that in mind today. A bit of a smattering of people in aspiring or leadership roles, so I'll keep that in mind too. But I'm going to gear a lot of what we're doing today at you people that are in the classroom. So thank you so much for that. I have to remember now to hide the results, move back into the PowerPoint, and then we go to the next slide. And my next bit of differentiation today is about Michael Hutchins' theory, which, In Excess did a great song, What You Need, and I want to know what you need today. So I'm going to launch another poll. And it's just a little bit about to give me an idea of what would be a good result for you today. So what I'm interested in is, are you looking for whole school strategies about how, and that goes to the idea of being consistent around relationships. The one good part about running a webinar about relationships at the start of term 3 is that the honeymoon's over. You know what you've got in the classroom, and if you're looking for strategy that you can use consistently with your whole class, then just fill that number 2 bit. If you're looking for what am I doing right, what am I doing wrong, what's my superpower, what's my kryptonite, I'd really like to know. You're in a bit of a reflective mood today, I'd like to know that. Is it about how I can get some traction with the kids that really give us a hard time? Let's be really honest about it. We do have students who we know need and deserve our love, but they make it so hard to get sometimes, and they take up so much time and energy as well that it's really challenging. And then the last one might be in terms of relationships. How is it that I could potentially positively impact my colleagues? How can I get some strategy that I can share with other people on the staff? So I'm really interested to know of those options which you're looking for today. So we are getting a bit of a theme emerging here. We've gone past 80% again, so thanks guys. I'm going to share those results with you so you can see them too. And really we've got some focus today around pointy end, and then also how can I take some of those strategies, I guess, and spread them across my entire class as well. It comes out with basically 60% of the people in the room are looking for how can I reach that kid, and then how can I reach those kids. So that's good, that's good. I've got a really clear frame now and a context for us as we move forward. I'll hide those results and then we'll get straight back into content. Okay, so like I said, I want to focus today on the little things. I want us to think not about a grand new approach that you don't have room for. I want us to think about what are the little things that I can do that are a little bit different. And the first thing, and I guess this goes to the notion of bullying, that that a lot of when it comes to relationships, bullying is a sign of a breakdown in relationship. It's a sign of a weak relationship where the connection between one person and another has deteriorated to such a point that it can tolerate negative and power-based interactions in that relationship. So that's no good. And if there's an antidote for bullying, it would be, for me, not a great program, as people have heard me bang on before. We've tried 9,000 programs globally around bullying. The antidote is not program 9001. If there's an antidote to bullying, it's empathy. It's an ability to understand and to care about how your behaviour affects other people. I'm very deliberate about that definition, about being empathy is the ability to understand and then care. So the first question, we do get kids, as we know, and particularly often kids who are on the autism spectrum, who find empathy very difficult, particularly the notion of caring. But what they can do is understand. They can know. The first step is a knowledge thing. Can we actually train them to understand the way it affects other people? And then through the ability to build and then sustain and even sometimes restore or repair relationships, can they get better at the understand part? Sorry, at the care part. So empathy is hugely important for that. It's really important for us to be able to determine the difference between empathy and sympathy. Empathy, in a nutshell, empathy is about them. Sympathy is about us. And the best example I can think of is about that is, when we have, we often in Western society show sympathy when somebody dies, and we send to the family who is grieving, we send a bunch of flowers, which is lovely. There's nothing sinister about expressing sympathy by sending flowers. It's just that they don't really need the flowers. I'm sure none of you have ever lost a dearly loved family member and gone, gee, this would be so much better if I had a bunch of roses. And the truth is, when it comes to sympathy, that the flowers are for the person sending them. It makes the person sending the flowers feel that they've done something. And like I said, there's nothing bad about that, but the person receiving it doesn't really need it. Empathy would be sending to that family lasagna, because the truth is they don't want to cook at the moment, and that's an understanding. It's about knowing, understanding, and then caring about what they're actually going through on that particular day. You get funny examples where we cross the line between empathy and sympathy, and that's between all stakeholders in a school culture, between parents and across between parents and staff and students. I think one of the classics that we hear between parents and students is, if a student goes home and says that they have been bullied, then the parent tends to leap into, oh, I know exactly what you're going through. This happened to me when I was in year 9, and it was absolutely terrible, and these girls did this to me, and I've never really recovered, And when you think about that dialogue and that speech, the truth is that it's all about the parent and not about the child. I think we do it in our staffs as well. I think that if somebody was to come to the staff room and say that that they've got a real issue with with their year 5 class at the moment, I think that often what we hear is someone say, oh yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about. I had a class like that 5 years ago, and man, they really messed me up. And what I did with this, and if you did that, then you'd be absolutely fine. And they leap from it being all about them into advice, and advice from that position is often really unhelpful. So I think we need to be careful in our language. When we're demonstrating empathy, we're not saying stuff like I know, we're saying stuff like I see. And we're saying things like, I understand, or it seems. So we say to young people, it seems that this is having a big impact on you. Can you tell me a little bit more about it? Or I see that this has actually got you quite agitated. Why don't I give you a little quiet time before we discuss it more properly? They're demonstrations of empathy and not sympathy. So I want you to think carefully about whether the language that we're using with young people is modeling for them someone who cares about them, or someone who is allowing circumstance to be reflected in ourselves. The second thing that really helps is to share your story. I had a fabulous conversation yesterday, and I say hi to the wonderful people at Cannock Primary School. We were having a good chat about relationships yesterday, and so one of the things we talked about was how we could improve relationships by sharing a little bit more of ourselves. And this is very much research proven, that when we take a clinical approach to the relationships in schools, and we start to do things like, well, we don't worry too much about the relationship because we've got curriculum to get through, when we don't actually invest in any way in connecting personally and sharing part of ourselves with young people, school, we find that they kind of don't care if we have to tick them off about their behaviour. So, or if we have to challenge them, or if we have to push them a little bit harder, they just don't respond unless we've shared a little bit of ourselves with them. And so you really have to look for informal mechanisms. One of my absolute favourites is two truths and a lie. And so that's the idea of, you know, coming up with 3 facts, but one of them is a lie. A little hint for you: if you are going to do two truths and a lie, have your sequence of facts organised early, because if you tell people if you tell people the first 2 facts and then say then there's a fair chance they'll know that the third one's the lie. So if you want to win, you know, just get that one right. But it's hugely important to share a little bit of ourselves. We talked yesterday at Cannock about a school that I work with, who, or I did work with previously, who started lunchtime interviews. And I had to ask, what do you mean lunchtime interviews? And all they did was that every day, one teacher in the school went to a different class that wasn't theirs at eating time. And that class knew they were coming, and the teacher sat at the front of the room like it was they were running a press conference. And the students had prepared questions for them that allowed them the opportunity to share their story while they ate. So all they needed is one person to get covered for 10 or 15 minutes a day. And every day that happened in their school, that one teacher did a lunchtime interview. And I thought that it was such a clever thing, because so many teachers that I speak to, you know, sometimes bemoan that they might be out on yard duty and you've got to correct the behaviour, or, you know, redirect a student who's doing something that you don't know. And it's very difficult to do that when you don't know. So we need to build some informal mechanisms into our schools where, you know what, we do know, which is really, really great when those little things start to happen, because you don't have to get, you know, the great part about informal approaches to relationship building is that they're kind of fun. So 2 truths and a lie and lunchtime interviews, I couldn't think of something that I would enjoy more in a school than that kind of thing. So share your story and find little fun ways to make that happen. The next one is to take an achievement focus. When I introduced the webinar today, the banner at the start of the webinar was very much about how we, about high expectation relationships. And I think about this a lot when I even had an example of it of a school that I worked with once, who they called me in January, and we did a little bit of a meeting with the leadership in January about how they were trying to commence the year and sort of get off to a fresh start and a clean slate. And one of the things they said to me, they said, well, we feel like we sort of encourage our teachers that they've got to, you know, get through so much that I think people feel under pressure that they've got to get cracking with everything on day one, and the relationship thing doesn't, you know, receive any attention or focus. And so I said, okay, so what are you thinking? And they said, what we're thinking is that we're going to spend the first 3 weeks of the school year building relationships in the classroom. So we're not going to put any pressure on our teachers to do any curriculum or academic work in the first 3 weeks. The first 3 weeks are about everybody getting to know each other and having an incredibly enjoyable and positive experience of school at the start of the year. And when you say it like that, it kind of makes sense. But then they asked me what I thought, and so they said, do you think that's a good idea? And I said, no. And they said, why? And I said, because I don't want to teach in your school in week 4. Because all of a sudden the expectations have changed. We've gone from sending an impression to our students that relationships are about fun, and relationships are about enjoyment, and relationships are about being nice to each other, and that relationships are about low expectations. And I said, I hate to think what the kickback might be in week 4 when we all of a sudden decide to fold expectations into the relationships. And so my message to you there is that I think that even in, you know, week 1, as you're you know, doing week 1 of semester 2, is done. You know, the example is, I guess sometimes we'll do enjoyable things like colour in the front page of a maths book or something like that. For me, the best relationships are built out of getting maths done. I think if you look even at the picture on the screen now, the enjoyment and the happiness comes from achievement rather than happiness being the byproduct, the base of it. In fact, when I think it comes to relationships, I think that we're not in the happiness business. I think we're in the effectiveness business. So when it comes to great relationships that you can leverage for higher levels of performance, I want you to make achievement the focus of your relationships immediately. Oh, the next one. This is something that, again, is research proven to make such a difference. There's a bit of a list, and a lot of the work that I'm doing today comes from a list that I use with schools when I'm training around restorative practices. And I often get the list up on the screen, and there's probably about maybe 25, 30 terms on the screen of little things that are research proven to build and sustain good relationships. And one of them is to apologise and be vulnerable. And I run a little social experiment where I go, usually there's a teacher in the room of significant experience and who's been around the block a few times. If I say, which one here do you think the experienced teacher points at and says, that one, that matters more than people know? And often, out of 25 or 30, the first one they point at is the ability to apologise and be vulnerable in front of your students. I did present that once, and a teacher in the room decided this was a good time to put her hand up, and she said, Adam, that's the greatest load of nonsense I've ever heard. The kids at our school are tough. If you walk in there and start apologising, oh, well, I'm really sorry you don't feel like doing maths today, or I'm really sorry that you think I suck, or I'm really sorry that you had breakfast this morning. You said they are going to hand over all of your power and they're going to walk all over you. And I said, okay. And I challenged her and said, do you mind running this experiment for me? Could you just try it and tell me how you go? And I went back a few weeks later, and I asked, did you do the apology thing? And she said, she goes, yeah. She wasn't particularly comfortable about talking to me, but she said, yeah, I did. And I said, how'd you go? And she goes, yeah, all right, I'm still doing it. She goes, only because it works, not because I really like doing it, and I'm prepared to take that. And she sort of grinned, and she said, actually, I'm starting to apologise for things that aren't my fault now, which I thought was completely hilarious. And she goes, so just because it works, just because it works. And I think that's the lesson here, is that there's a funny thing about teaching, and it's quite an ancient relic, if you like, and I think it comes from the days when teaching was about knowledge. So you had to know lots to be able to be a teacher. You had to know everything. I think today it manifests as people asking us how to spell things at dinner parties because we're teachers, because we're apparently supposed to know how to spell all of the words. And so what it means is that we felt a little bit of embarrassment if we didn't. So we're not very good at admitting that we've got things wrong. And I think there's nothing more powerful than you can do in a class than, instead of, if you've done a bit of a lesson and 10, 15 minutes into it, it's just haywire and it's not working, I think there'd be nothing worse than trying to persist for another 40 odd minutes in that lesson. I think the best teachers stop and they just go, guys, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I clearly haven't set this lesson up the right way or given instruction the right way. So apologies for that. Do you mind just coming back to the front of the room, because I'd really like to fix this up now? And I think what you're modelling for young people is that when you do get something wrong, you've got a responsibility to fix it. And number two, I just think you're modelling a bit of lifelong learning for them, and that's hugely important. And I think even better than that, I think we have an issue with the word sorry. I think that we're really quick to, just say sorry because it's just the thing you do when things go wrong. And our kids are very good these days at delivering fake apologies. And it allows us to move into that model where, being genuinely sorry means doing something. When it comes to working with students and behaviour, I often refer to sweaty apologies. You've got to get off your backside. You really got to make amends when you get it wrong. And I think when we model that for our students, we show them that it's not about that it's okay to make mistakes, and we model for them that the most important thing you do when you make a mistake is to learn from it. And that's a good thing to be teaching our students. Number 5 is that I really want you to have a good think about making sure that the boundaries are clear. I was recently in doing a day with a school where we were working in class and starting to implement some of the stuff from our training. And I visited 2 classes, one after the other. I visited a year 1 class first, and a lovely teacher, a really fantastic teacher who has such terrific intentions, and also has such a kind and fair and generous voice when she's working with the students. I wish I had that. But the students weren't responding particularly well. And I think what it was the absence of very clear, strong and almost challenging to reach boundaries. One of the very best teachers that I ever worked with, I trained her on restorative practices, and she said, I want you to tell me if this is restorative. She goes, instead of, and she used to have a list of about 25 rules on the wall. And she says now, she goes, I really had to think about which ones I really wanted to stand for. And she said, so what the deal is, she goes, I'm a restorative teacher. I tell the kids that everything's negotiable, except these 3 things. Don't mess with me on safety, workload, or language. Do not swear at each other or at me in my classroom. Everything else we'll talk about and we'll work it out. And I think that's a really great way to make clear for her students what she stands for, because what she'd highlighted was that the boundaries weren't clear because there were too many of them. So looking to have established for your classroom, if you are going to have rules or expectations or boundaries, making sure that they're small in number and that they're ridiculously clear is the way to go about it. So going back to the Year 1 class, again, all the very best intentions and all the best support in place, but it wasn't until I left that class and I went into the prep class next door. So same school, same cohort, same socioeconomic background, but kids who were slightly less mature and used to school. Yet their engagement was so different, and it was because that teacher had made it very clear to the students the way that they were to engage in the classroom. She rewarded the right behaviours in her classroom with attention. She completely ignored, but also made it very clear that that behaviour was not on any time a student did do something like yell out or interrupt or not sit or be where they needed to be at that time. They really understood it, but at the same time still provided them that wonderful support that allowed them to reach that expectation. That's what happens. When you set really clear boundaries and then you support like crazy, the kids climb. If all we do is support without the clear boundaries, then the kids know that we like us. They just don't do anything particularly, particularly impressive, to be honest. All right, number 6, differentiate by relationship. We differentiate the academic program all the time. So we're very comfortable. Whoops, I'm just trying to get my slide deck back here. There we go. We're very comfortable with saying that if you need a little bit of extra help with fractions, we'll do that. We're not going to give you disrespectful. We talk a lot about respectful assessment tasks. So we talk about, making sure that a task you're doing is not either too hard, because that would be disrespectful to make you feel like a failure. And we also make sure that it's not too easy. We don't want you to feel like you're, king of the world, when the truth is you're not. You've still got something to work on. So that's a respectful assessment task. And I think that it's also hugely important that that we differentiate by relationship, that we let each of our kids know that we know who they are and we treat them as the individuals they are. I'm going to play about a minute or so, a minute and a half, I think, of a video of a teacher that's just gone to the trouble of letting each of her students know that they are special and individuals in her classroom. All I think watching that video is, one, I guess the first thing I do is I think, how long would it take you? What's the time? What's the investment that you need to make when you do something like that, to get those individualized handshakes, I suppose, for lack of a better term for it, organised. And the truth is, I don't think it'd be that hard. I really reckon that within a week at the start of the school year, you could just about have that nailed. And because she's practicing it every day, it's not that difficult for her in an ongoing way to make that happen. But the message sent to each of those students every time that you remember their own individual handshake, I think, is that you respect them and that you have differentiated by relationship. You've got to know that student well enough. And I think that's wonderful insulation for that teacher against negative behaviours in the classroom. So I think that's where an investment in relationships that's very explicit, it's very visual, it's very individualised. I think that teacher will get a better return for that week of thinking and that week of practice of these handshakes. I think that teacher will get a fabulous return for that investment of her time as that year goes on, because she gets to remind the students every single day that relationship matters. And when we know that we're in a trusting and when we know that we're in an invested relationship, we're far less likely to demonstrate negative and power influenced behaviours towards each other. So, when a teacher does that to you every day, I think it's very difficult to go into the classroom and then yell out at that teacher or to disrupt or to disrespect that teacher. So thinking about explicit ways to differentiate by relationship, I think is just an ingenious way to go about our work. Number 7, I want you to have a good think about affirming positive rather than negative labels. When we blame, when we punish, and when we reinforce for kids some stuff, particularly around failure, that if you think you're the naughty kid, then the chances are you're going to live up to that negative label. If you think that you're the kid who hurts other kids, if you're told constantly that you're the fighter, then the high likelihood is you're going to live up to that label and you're going to fight. If you think that you're the kid that's dumb, then the high likelihood is that you expect to get a lot of your work wrong. And kids, like I said, live up to those labels. So what we want to do is affirm the positive rather than the negative labels. I used to, often, tell kids that, I was really impressed with. So just checking my control panel here, guys. I used to let kids know that I was absolutely, really, a kid. I told one kid that he was my resilient champion. And so he was a kid who didn't often do very well. He struggled to win a lot of races physically. He wasn't exactly my high flyer in terms of academic, but what he really understood was that it didn't matter and that I would praise him constantly for always having a go. So he was my resilient king. He was my resilient champion. And he lived up to that by, instead of, hanging his head if things didn't work for him in any sort of competitive or academic field, he said, "Oh, mate, I've got to keep going because I'm the resilience king." And I thought that was fabulous. And what we'd done was affix and then affirm a positive label to him. Anita, I'm noticing you with your hand up there. I don't know whether I always give people a little opportunity to let me know that that's an accident. But if that hand's still up in a few seconds, Anita, I want to come to you and hear what you've got to say. So let me give it a try. Anita, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Good to talk to you, Anita. What point did you want to bring up for us?
Good to talk to you too, Adam. Listen, about that affirming positive labels, I've got a student in my class who's like been the bad kid, I guess. Yeah. Always having issues last year in the classroom and in the playground. So I've been working really hard on developing strong relationships with him. Mute yours. Sorry, we've got feedback here. A
little bit of feedback there. We'll live with it.
Yeah, we're going to mute. No, you're going to go to your sound. That's a problem. Okay, so we've developed the situation where he's not doing it in the classroom anymore. Okay, so yep. We're good there, and I can recognise immediately when he comes in after recess or lunch that he needs to draw him out. We don't need to even talk, we just acknowledge that and he just goes to his spot.
Yep.
But we don't seem to be making any headway with the time where it's unstructured situations. Yeah. How do you deal with that?
Yeah, I've always thought that anytime you're trying to teach a social skill, there are 3 steps. Number one is to make it is to teach it explicitly. So that's about language and having very clear language they do. If you get kids that come in, for instance, who might be a bit angry, and they need to learn that the anger rules, for instance, are just do whatever you need to do, but just don't hurt others, don't hurt yourself, and don't break anything. And so if we can have that in place, then I guess you can start to put in place for kids so that they can be the anger champion for your classroom. They can be the kid that knows how to deal with it, and you get other kids to go to them. Once they're coaching other people around that, then they feel like they can't let you down around that quite as often, and they start to transfer. Yep. Those 3 steps of teaching a social skill to young people are: number one is to learn the language, learn it explicitly. Number 2 is to apply it to something non-threatening. So if you can do it in terms of having him coach somebody else, make the sign for the classroom about the anger rules, and do it and do something with it that's completely non-threatening, and you don't have that's got nothing to do with getting angry. It's just using a strength of theirs. Then there's a higher likelihood that they'll apply it to the real world. So I hope that's helpful, Anita. Just I'd try to find a way to make him a champion of the issue.
Yeah, I'll give that a go. Look, I'm willing to give anything a go because we've developed a really strong relationship, and I'm really pleased about that. But it's that when I'm not there.
I think the other really important thing, Anita, is to also let him know that when you're not there, you care. Sometimes our kids, and we do get kids sometimes who, I had a teacher describe it to me as they take the mentality of a cat, and a cat will go and kill a bird in your honour during the night, and because they have such a strong relationship with you, sometimes they feel that you're the only person they can be good for, and they go and destroy another teacher in your honour. And so I think it's sometimes just be wary of that and let them know that while you think it's great that they're doing this for you, you care, and it impacts you when it has a negative impact on you when they demonstrate those behaviours for other people.
Yeah, okay. Well, I think I have been unintentionally doing that anyway, talking about my disappointment that he is behaving this way when I'm not there.
And that's that effective language from restorative land that I think can really, in time, make a difference. But you've got distance covered. So there's fair signs there that you're actually making ground here, and you just got to keep making sure you build on it, don't you?
Yeah.
Spot on. All right, Anita, thank you. I'm going to mute you again, and we'll get straight back into things. Little thing number 8 is about respect. Okay, now the idea of respect, and this is something that resonates with any sort of great educator, is that we've got to give respect to get respect. But the most important thing about respect is that we define it, that we make it clear what it is in our school, and it doesn't need to be the things that we often think respect is all about. Because the problem with respect is that we all have varying definitions for it. So we need to start ridiculously simple with it. I speak often to a video that I saw a while back at a school in America. And they were one of those schools that I mentioned earlier on that had respect listed as a value, but it was a disrespectful environment with a lot of violence, a lot of aggression, a lot of even drug use that was happening in that environment. And so a new principal arrived at the school and did a couple of really clever things. What he did was he had the students work with him to design a new logo. So he had some secondary students work on that logo with him. And what they did with the logo was they carved it in the lino in the doorway to every classroom. And the students and the staff that worked on this together agreed that respect in their school would be, we don't step on our logo. And what it did as students got to every class and took a big step as they entered the classroom so they didn't step on the lino, was that they got noticed by their teacher. And that means that as they at the very moment that they walk into the classroom, the teacher has something to thank and congratulate them for. And that builds trust, and it reduces conflict around what we mean when we're talking about respect. So hugely important to define it in very simple behavioural terms. And we don't need to always think about that as being a really big thing. Respect is a big thing with a lot of potential behaviours under it. Define what the 1 or 2 behaviours are in your school that it could be. I saw a school recently that I visited who have their values up on the wall, and they had the value of respect up there, and then they had one constant. There's a behaviour for respect, and I don't remember right now what that was. But the thing that struck me was that they also have an additional column next to it, which is what respect means this week. And I do remember that the behaviour that they were demonstrating that week was please and thank you. So in a respectful relationship, we say please and thank you. And that was a huge focus for them just for that week. So the thing that I love about that was they defined respect in incredibly specific and behavioural terms. And I think that they're on the right track by taking it that way. Another thing you can do to build these relationships is to just focus on your own predictability. If you ask your students, ask yourself sometimes a little bit, if a student in my class has done something wrong, and they came to me and told me that they had done that thing wrong, or if somebody else had informed me that that student had done something wrong, would I react the same way to both scenarios? Would I react to the student disclosure and the independent observer disclosure the same way? Is there any predictability about the way that I take, the way that I respond to poor behaviour choices in my students? And I think that that's a great reflective prompt, to think about, if a student came to me and said that there'd been a problem with another student's behaviour, can they feel comfortable in the way that I'll respond to that? Can they feel comfortable in whether I would disclose what they're telling me to somebody else, or whether I would do anything, or whether I would contact parents? And I think that's a really interesting one too, even the contacting parents notion. I think a lot of our kids play parents and teachers against each other. And they sort of believe that the home and school domains have some sort of separation. Whereas I was constantly reminding my students that I would communicate with their parents any behaviours that their parents might describe as being interesting. So if I thought they'd done something interesting, I would let them know, I really should tell your mum about that. And whether it was a positive or a negative interesting, they knew that there was some predictability about my response in that regard. They knew that they couldn't do one thing one day when I was busy and I wouldn't report it, but I would only do it if I wasn't busy enough. They knew that if it was interesting, I would probably let their parents know. So being predictable in our responses is also a key to those great relationships. And the last one, I reckon, whenever you get a whole group of people together who are interested enough educators to give up an hour on a Thursday afternoon to think about teacher-student relationships, I reckon it makes sense and resonates to all of you that you would need to use a little bit of humour. And one thing that I love, and it's also unique, is that there's a type of humour, particularly in Australia, I think, that seems to resonate across the ages, across the phases of life. And as inappropriate as it might be for me to say this, I think it's sarcasm. I think sarcasm is really interesting in terms of a way to approach humour in our relationship. But because if you have a good relationship with a student or with a group of students, sarcasm can work really, really well. It also can work to build the relationship. So you've got to be a little bit careful with it. You've got to be a little bit careful with it, because to use sarcasm where there is no relationship can sometimes be a little bit confusing. But once we get that relationship going, this sarcasm thing really takes off. So a few examples of teachers who've done a great job. Obviously an assessment piece here, the students got an F and they've got some pretty nasty feedback about it because obviously they haven't done exactly what they were supposed to do. And the teacher decided to attach for them a McDonald's application form with the response. Now, I don't think that's a serious teacher. I think that's a teacher using a little bit of sarcasm to let the student know, hey, come on, what, you want to end up at McDonald's? No, let's get this stuff right. Here's a teacher that got a little bit sick of being asked for a pen, so when his students now come to his classroom and ask to borrow a pen or a pencil, this is what they're provided with, which I think is just awesome. Here's a teacher who had deliberately was drinking a drink bottle in front of the students, and the students wanted to check out that drink bottle, and he let them know that the label that he put on it was students' tears, which I think is, again, cruel and equally hilarious. Here's a teacher that did an entire lesson about the different atmospheric layers in the earth, referring to the earth not once as the earth, but always as the Death Star, and presented it to the students the whole of the lesson, which I can only imagine how warm and uncomfortable it must have been in there. Presented the whole thing as Darth Vader, which I think is great. Here's a teacher that decided to present the periodic table to students and to make a little bit of a song out of it. If you're familiar with Lady Gaga at all and the song Bad Romance, then you will know the little riff that's evident within the periodic table here, which I think is very clever. And then here's this one. Well, I really like this one. So, you know, the whole idea of saying to the kids, dear students, I know when you're texting in class, seriously, no one looks down at their crotch and smiles. So I think that's just a really clever way of getting a message across to the students about an expectation without having to nag about put your phone away, which I think is a really clever way to tackle what is for many teachers a really significant problem. So hopefully there are 10 things that you can use as that reflective lens, uses that reflective mirror to say, okay, which one of those are evident within my relationships that I should say, you know what, that's actually valuable. I need to make sure that no matter how busy I get, that never slips away. You know, and even on this last point of humour, I mean, really, you know, no matter how busy we get, our sense of humour shouldn't get compromised. But I also want you to think about which is the one that you could do a little bit more of, which is the one that if you had some focused intent around, that you could improve and thicken those relationships with young people. I said at the start that I would rush and give you a whole heap of information. We're really wrapped with this Teacher Fast Track program, which I think is a way to not have that one-off event and to not have that one-off, you know, hit around relationships that we know doesn't work. And so it's a 12-month commitment to teachers and about the stuff that really matters, and that's relationships. So every one of the modules in this 12-month commitment, and there's 10 of them, we don't send you modules in December and January because we know you don't want to do them then. So every one of the modules is geared around classroom practice such that you can build relationships and get a better effect from your work. Every month you do a module online, you watch about a 30 or 40-minute video, you answer some questions that allow you and challenge you to contextualise it within your current class and your current work, and they drop out to a local mentor, so there's someone in your school you can have a chat with about it as well. And we give you a heap of resources also in every single fast track module. So we reckon it's pretty cool, and we're getting some feedback around it that reflects that others think it's pretty cool too. So this is some I'm not going to read this to you, as a testimonial from Stephanie at Roberts McCubbin Primary School. And really what our people who are involved in the fast track are saying to us is that it's easy because they can actually do their professional learning at a time that works for them. It's engaging because it's about real issues and real improvement within the classroom, and because it allows them to actually think about how I'm going to use this information rather than just know it and add it to my professional learning resume. So it's very real, it's very down to earth, it's very practical, and it's very ongoing. So I want to encourage you to just have a bit of think about whether that could be useful to you. So number one, in terms of 2 actions that I'd love you to take today, number one is download that slide deck. Focusing on relationships has got to be more than the hour you've put aside today, and I really want you to have that. And number 2, if you think that the Teacher Fast Track in your school could be valuable, happy to send you that prospectus that you saw on the previous page. Don't worry, we're not going to sign you up, we're not going to invoice you. We want you to have all the information so that you can make your own and a very informed choice. So go to that question or that chat box and just put the letters TFT in there if you think that we can if you think that might be useful to you. We just reckon that sending teachers away to a professional learning experience and hoping that they'll come back and transform everything is both unfair and unproductive. So we reckon this is a better way to support teachers with what really happens within the walls of the classroom. So I want to remind you also about our August webinar. There's a concept around disruptive innovation that a lot of people may have heard about but not really sure what it is. You may have heard about it in terms of an industry perspective but not be sure about how it applies to schools. What I can do is tell you that it applies incredibly directly to schools. So the webinar that we're going to run in August, and I really want, I guess, people who are ambitious. I want people who are either classroom teachers who say, you know what, I don't want to be just the same as everybody else. I want to do things differently. I really want you to consider coming along to that webinar. And I want anyone with any sort of leadership aspirations or is currently in a leadership role to think about this, because this is about doing things not better, but differently. I think we try too hard in schools to do things better, and I think we put a hell of a lot of effort sometimes into making things better, and we get a return on investment of about 1%. We can go to all sorts of trouble to make things slightly better. I would rather that we got all sorts of return for slight effort. And so that's what this webinar is going to be all about, how to bring this notion of disruptive innovation, doing things differently, not necessarily doing things better and not fitting in with everybody else. That's going to be a key focus of that webinar. You're going to get an invitation to that in the follow-up email, but I wanted to prime you to get yourself involved in that one. I reckon this is going to be a good one, and I'm really looking forward to presenting it. Again, guys, thank you so much for coming. It's just fabulous. I get heartened by it every month that we get so many people who will give up their time to immerse themselves in this. Thank you, and if we can be of service to your school, please go and have a look at how we're doing that at realschools.com.au, and drop us a line at info@realschools.com.au if you think that there's something you'd like to have a yarn about that you think we could do to help your school get going. Thank you so much, Jane Wise, for your lovely feedback there. Really appreciate it. Thank you to everyone that's put TFT in that question box. We're going to get some information out to you pronto, and go and have a fabulous semester 2, everyone. All right, I'll see you in August. Bye-bye.